Gout carried off Cosimo in the 1460s, and his grandson, the next great patron in the family line, would banish any trace of Medici guilt forever. Lorenzo il Magnifico, Lorenzo the Magnificent, was given the best classical education money could buy. But Lorenzo, rich beyond belief, didn't use that education for banking, but in the pursuit of pleasure.
I think the key to Lorenzo's character was his flamboyance. Whereas Cosimo was very cautious, Lorenzo made no bones about being the most powerful man in Florence, and he didn't care if everybody knew. Whereas Cosimo never took his eye off the ball of the Medici bank. Lorenzo, frankly, was bored by banking. For him, the main point of life was to commission art. And in his vision of Florence, art was absolutely at the centre.
Lorenzo's great dream was to revive the beauty and myths of the ancient classical past. And he took practical steps to create a generation of artists capable of making his fantasy real.
Now, if it wasn't for the Medici, these students might not be doing what they're doing today, because the story goes that Lorenzo il Magnifico was so concerned that standards were dropping in Renaissance Florentine art that he had the idea of founding an academy. He gathered together a number of choice works of art from the Medici's own collections. He hired a tutor, and bang, the modern art school was born.
Lorenzo set up this academy in his own garden, where students would copy from his collection of classical sculptures. And Lorenzo's devotion to pagan rather than religious art moulded the minds of his students. One of them was the young Michelangelo. Lorenzo nurtured his genius when he was just 15 years of age.
Now, if you want visual evidence of the huge impact that Lorenzo the Magnificent had on the young Michelangelo, it's to be found in this room, because here we've got the only two sculptures that he's known to have created while studying in Lorenzo's sculpture garden. Here we've got this beautiful low-relief sculpture, a classical technique. It's the Madonna of the Stairs, and he was taught this technique by the sculpture instructor that Lorenzo had installed in the garden. Beautiful piece, but it's still within the religious language. If you want to see how Michelangelo's imagination was really opened up by the influence of Lorenzo, it's here in this great sculpture called The Battle of the Centaurs, which is one of the most precious things in the Michelangelo house, although they've actually allowed me to open the Perspex case so we can see the sculpture in its full glory. Isn't that fantastic? Here you've got these writhing bodies, not a religious reference, not a trace of saintly iconography. This is a purely classical work of art. And its subject is struggle, and in a sense I think that's very appropriate, because what we're seeing here is Michelangelo wrestling the forms of sculpture into a new shape. This is really the birth of Western European secular art.
Lorenzo had wanted to revive ancient Rome, but this was still Christian Florence. He died in 1492, and with his death, the spectres of heaven and hell returned with a vengeance. The backlash arrived in the shape of a fanatical monk called Girolamo Savonarola.
This parade is held every year in celebration of the memory of Girolamo Savonarola, and it's a symbol of Florence's deeply ambivalent attitude towards its own past, because while they still cherish the memory of the Medici in this city, in celebrating Savonarola's memory, they're also celebrating a man who did his best to tear down and destroy everything that the Medici had spent so long attempting to create.
Savonarola ordered a purge of the pagan art the Medici had revived. Nymphs, naked gods and goddesses, it all had to go.
The flowers marked the spot where he'd organised these immense, almost frenzied religious festivals known as the Bonfires of the Vanities, where all of the people of Florence would be encouraged to bring their most valuable possessions here, including works of art, paintings, sculptures, and to pile them into great bonfires and burn them all for the glory of God. In many ways, Savonarola was the Medici's worst nightmare come to life.
Savonarola preached that the end of the world was nigh. A mood of apocalyptic terror gripped Florence as the people turned against the Medici. In 1494, just 2 years after Lorenzo's death, his eldest son Piero realized the family was in mortal danger.
The Medici were forced to flee the city in fear of their very lives. Piero, the head of the family, got his wife and children together, and they escaped under cover of darkness on horseback. The family's possessions and palaces were ransacked. Their works of art were either seized or destroyed.
And Michelangelo, by now Italy's greatest artist, was swept along by the new Republican fervour. The city commissioned him to create a Christian symbol of Florentine strength. His heroic David, ready to vanquish Goliath, stood against all those who would corrupt this sacred republic, including the Medici. The family would remain in exile from Florence for nearly 2 decades.